So, as promised, I did say I was going to move away from doing Deku videos for just a little bit, but today's topic should be just a little bit more interesting than Deku versus Yuji was. This one involves the infamous hothead of the My Hero verse, Bakugo, and today we're going to be putting him up against every single special grade curse, except one. For the sake of this video, a few things are going to need to be established before we go into it. So, in order to have it function, Bakugo needs to obviously be able to see and harm the curses. People might find this generous for some reason, but without it, the question would basically be whether he could stand there and tank all of his attacks, which would be kind of stupid in a conversation of who scales higher than who. So we'll be allowing domains to target Bakugo also, even though he has no cursed energy. And lastly, I chose to leave out Rika because normally she's paired with Yuta, so having her separate from him would kind of be weird, and I'll be bringing them up in a different video anyway pretty soon. So let's get on to the video. So for the finger bearers, this will likely be the shortest and easiest section of the video. The finger bearers really aren't anything to write home about, to be honest, and we know the first finger bearer scales above an earlier Yuji who can destroy walls and travel about 50 meters in 3 seconds in the first few chapters. Then on top of that, the second finger bearer is stronger, but it's not anything significant by comparison to the other curses or Bakugo. And to circle back about the 50 meters in 3 seconds, not only does Ida from My Hero have similar statements to this, like super early on, but Bakugo's blasts, which he uses for speed and mobility, are stated to be nitroglycerin, which is calculated to be Mach 22, even on the low end. And for his AP, very early on, we see Bakugo let off blasts that are powerful enough to level large buildings without him breaking a sweat. And much later on than that, in the Two Heroes movie, Bakugo is able to destroy Wolfram's cubes, which are calculated to be somewhere around large town level or higher, and he has more showings that puts him largely above these feats, but even given this scaling, he destroys these guys no difficulty. So let's move on from here. So let's move on to Choso, Kechizu, and Eso. We know Eso and Kechizu are probably stronger than the finger bearer Yuji first fights, since they're able to oppress a stronger Yuji. Even though they have scaling above the finger bearer, they still don't even reach the speed of sound tiers, and for AP, there's not much new about them. They do have their poison blood, and honestly, I don't believe they'd be able to get the blood on Bakugo, but even if they did, there's two problems with this. One, Esso's blood honestly just sucks. He even mentions that you'd need to be drowned in it for it to kill you, so regardless of if Bakugo got hit, he'd likely just keep fighting and kill him. And two, depending on which of the brothers you think has the higher quality blood, both Yuji and Obara have at least a 5-minute difference in the timing of the decay, which to me, the only difference between the two that would make up the time difference is their durability. So in that instance, Bakugo would just take more time for his skin to rot in a significant way, allowing him to again just one-shot them both in the same span of time. But this is a bit of a weird thing to kind of break down, but I'd be curious to hear your opinions on it down below. Now Choso is only different in the sense that piercing blood is faster than the speed of sound at its initial velocity, which makes him more of a threat than poison blood. But this shouldn't matter though, because Bakugo would definitely dodge it casually and just blow Choso up or blast away him and his blood. Now, I did just say piercing blood is more of a threat. However, why it's not really an issue in this case for Bakugo is because we know it slows down, especially when changing trajectory. So considering even its initial speed, I don't see any case where Choso lands a hit on him, with Bakugo's reflexes being relative or on par with Deku in later parts of the story. Now, the disaster curses are where things get a little more interesting. All of these curses have domains, and scaling above the speed of sound tiers consistently. Hanami is probably the least dangerous as far as a matchup is concerned, not to mention we have no idea what her domain does. Now, a sure hit domain is a problem for anyone caught in one. We do know you can run away in a domain, as Gojo does call it almost impossible, but it has some chance to it. Now, whether by this he means you can open your own domain to form an exit like Megami, or just punch through it is unknown. Domains inside are typically tougher than they are outside, but they don't seem completely invulnerable. Let me know what you think about that in the comments below. As far as interactions go, if he does happen to get caught in it for whatever reason, in character, he would probably just start wilding out like he normally does and blow a hole in it and likely Dagon too. We don't know Jogo's sure hit, but we do know he's stronger than most. His max meteor is around large town level depending on how you scale the size of his meteor, and Bakugo would be able to beat him considering he scales over this in earlier parts of the series. We could take the Wolfram Cube's feat or his Howitzer Impact feat versus 9, which should be calced around large island level, and we know Jogo's durability isn't known to be much over his AP, so this should be pretty overkill in this instance. Also again, his domain sure hit is unknown, so we can't really say how it'll help in a hypothetical situation. Now before I move on, I'll say that Bakugo would likely never get trapped in Dagon or Jogo's domain, just due to sheer speed. If you want to keep Jogo at subsonic, that's completely your opinion, but there's other calcs that have Jogo at mass hypersonic too. Regardless of which you decide to go with, Bakugo is comparable to people that are much higher than both tiers of speed later on. And finally, we're at Mahito, who is extremely dangerous within JJK regardless of AP because he can attack a person's soul, essentially negating durability, as well as he can just reshape his soul every time he takes damage. And while under his domain, you're effectively in the palm of his hand and essentially helpless. Now I'm going to start off with how Bakugo could win with something kind of different. So in chapter 408, All For One, when looking at Bakugo, can think of nothing but Kudo. Someone who he's not only killed, but eliminated his entire bloodline, but then goes on to say that Kudo has traveled time and space just to thwart him. This makes people think Bakugo is a reincarnation of Kudo. We know if someone's soul is particularly strong, or if Mahito's soul is weaker, he can't one-shot their soul through transfiguration. He implies as much versus Todo and Nanami. So what if Bakugo, because of his soul being so strong, just tanks it? It's kind of a funny win con, but I wanted to give a different interpretation than just saying he speed blitzes and one-shots. But considering the line of logic in JJK, he should be able to tank it or be unaffected. Alternatively, we know Mahito alters his soul to avoid damage, so what if he just gets hit before he alters it? The more likely but boring win con is Bakugo just hits him with a blast so large that he can't reshape his soul, or Bakugo hits him in such quick succession, like Bakugo is stated to be able to do, that he just can't reshape his soul in time. Bakugo has pretty similar battle IQ to Deku, even though it's overshadowed by him screaming and always being a brute. He'd figure out how to overload Mahito's ability pretty quickly. Mahito can reshape his soul if Bakugo lets up, but that's really not in Bakugo's character to do so. So you may say Mahito can't die in this situation, but he definitely can't land a hit on Bakugo either, so Bakugo would just end up winning this fight by overpowering him. Now for the Roach Curse, there isn't really much here for him. It can avoid death really well, and that's about it. Bakugo would likely just catch him and blow him up, and that's probably it. It doesn't have many abilities at all to help him in this fight, so we'll move on from here. And next is the final big bad king of curses, Sukuna. He's honestly the greatest threat here, and I think we all know that. He's got the best scaling amongst the curses, and in the abilities department, he has all the 10 shadows, world cutting slash, domain, fire arrow, etc. I've seen people scale him to faster than light, but the problem with this is the FTL scaling is pretty bad. And I'm not gonna lie, all the calcs I've seen just turn into large disagreements and arguments on it, so the verse can't even really agree on the speed scaling for him. I've explained this in another video, but Sukuna and other high tier sorcerers can read moves based on CE flow or build up. They even showed this in more recent chapters with Kusakabe. Me personally, however, I don't believe he dodged the EM wave. Sukuna dodging it can be preemptive because of what I've just explained before, but I'm not mad if you have an opposing opinion on it. He has other scaling to massively hypersonic to fall back on, with reacting to Gojo's 200% hollow purple, and some have this calc higher than his feet running through Shibuya, which doesn't really save him here, unfortunately. Bakugo scales to versions of Deku who has sub-relativistic and even higher speed scaling. Now, if you believe their creation energy equals destruction energy, then Sukuna scales to domains, which create islands and landscapes, but in domains, the landscapes aren't consistent with the size of the domains, and the insides are referred to as art forms, which, following that train of thought, it likely mean the visuals that we see in domains aren't real. The outside of a domain can be much smaller, but on the inside, much larger. Bakugo should have island levels as mentioned earlier, or higher when taking into account him destroying Nine's Weather Storm. This should get him above Sukuna pretty easily, and we know it should scale higher than Star and Stripe, considering while not in condition to be able to fight, is able to damage All For One, who decided to mix every single quirk in his arsenal to try and kill Bakugo after his quirk awakening, and prior to this a much stronger Shigaraki. Hand to hand, Sukuna looks to be a combat genius in his verse, and even more capable in his hand era form, not only being able to stand toe to toe with more prominent characters in JJK, but also being able to replicate techniques having only seen them a few times, and not only this, but being able to improve on techniques that aren't his own. Bakugo has a bit of an unorthodox combat style since he uses his explosions for mobility and attacks, but he's also seen as a combat genius as well, right next to Deku and Todoroki. I do feel like Sukuna is the better fighter here generally, given experience and technical ability that he's shown with a multitude of abilities. Regardless of this, Bakugo still has the capabilities to take down someone like Sukuna. His ability set and stats are more than enough. Aside from his AP being higher, Bakugo has so much finite control over his ability, he can set off explosions in various ways. Versus the amalgamated All For One, he was able to throw sweat beads inside All For One's mouth and detonate them without him even noticing. This could serve as durability negation, as well as taking him off guard if he's unable to see Bakugo's sweat flying at him or doesn't pay attention to it at all. Now, to be fair, Sukuna does have the ability to lessen damage taken by using domain amplification, but I truly don't believe it'd be enough to prevent any significant damage, especially if it's internal. Finally, there's the 10 Shadows. Most of them don't really have a lot of feats, but they serve to distract Bakugo while Sukuna fires off different attacks. Mostly Agito and Mahoraga, when working together, can keep their opponents busy. Agito has a strong healing factor, so they need to be one-shot as to not cause trouble long-term, but the main threat is honestly Mahoraga. His adaptation means he can adapt to any phenomena, and that's honestly not hyperbole. He truly does adapt to things when the requirements are met. However, this doesn't really matter too much. For starters, Agito's durability doesn't really have many feats cross-verse wise, and should be able to be one-shot by a full-power Bakugo attack, given the scaling that we've presented before. Gojo states that Agito isn't as strong as Mahoraga or Sukuna, so it's likely irrelevant in this conversation anyway. Mahoraga is in a similar vein where Sukuna even thinks in his three-finger state, he's not completely sure Mahoraga would win. This of course puts him vaguely below 15 and 20 fingers. Now Sukuna can adapt for Mahoraga, but that requires him to be hit, and with Bakugo's AP being higher than Sukuna's durability, and given how Mahoraga's adaptation works, this likely wouldn't happen. As mentioned earlier, Bakugo is similarly high in battle IQ as Deku, and he understands his quirk just as well as someone like Deku understands his own. So under the instance where Sukuna does start to adapt, just like Gojo did, he would realize his attacks are weakening as Sukuna adapts to them and just blast him with a larger scale attack and knock him out. Something else Sukuna has going outside of the slashes is the fire arrow and his domain expansion. There's not much to say about it since we have no information on it really. It's enough to one-tap Jogo, but we don't know if it has any special properties or what the black box does. Sukuna's domain would honestly end up like the disaster curses, even with Sukuna being able to amp it. I honestly don't believe there's a way to prove he get caught in it for that matter. And as far as the world slash, because I know some of you are going to ask about it or probably mention it in the comments, there's in no way, shape, or form that Bakugo gets hit by world slash. I honestly would say Bakugo would win by blitzing and just one-shotting Sukuna, and likely blitzing him multiple times before Sukuna can even react. I stopped at sub-relativistic for Bakugo, but again, like I said earlier, he does have higher speed scaling than that. If you want more light speed scaling for My Hero Academia, you can check out my video linked in the description. However, if for some reason you think they're more comparable stat-wise, I honestly be curious to read your opinions on why that is. I read most of the comments that are there, and I try to respond to ones when I can. So that's all there is for today. Thanks for watching.